Hey, I was going to talk about what's going on in the K through 12 curriculum and what's in the pushback to it and the pushback to the pushback. So basically, you know, you've got all the legislation banning certain types of education, banning teaching of divisive concepts, banning of sex stereotyping and racial stereotyping and scapegoating and that kind of stuff. And some of the legislation specifically mentions CRTs. I don't think they all do. But I'm going to look at those and do videos on those later. I want to talk about this stuff right now because, like, we're having a stupid argument right now on whether or not this is CRT. Now, this is the pushback to the pushback. So this is coming from, the critical race theorists, the proponents of this stuff, the people who are selling this stuff, because this is a, huge money-making industry for people. And they're saying, well, that's not CRT. Why are you pushing back on CRT? Oh, that's just, the new right-wing boogeyman. They're pulling on it. You've got Don Lemon saying crap like that. You've got, people in the media, Joyanne Reid on MSNBC, and said Don Lemon on CNN. This problem is so far down the list that it's not even worth having. So I'm going to do two things here. One, I'm going to talk about roughly whether or not this is CRT or how it relates to CRT. And second, I'm going to try to give you some advice on what you should be focusing on and what you should be bothering to do, and forget all this other frivolous stuff. Okay, so I'm not going to go back to, Frankfurt School and all that stuff. Like there's plenty of stuff out there you can find. But what I'd like to concentrate on whether or not what's being taught in the schools is CRT, how it's working, and how to think about it. Okay, so a little bit of history on this stuff. So basically, in 1970, Derek Bell and a couple other people started something basically called critical legal studies. So they were looking at, some of the stuff from the Civil Rights Act, some of the stuff before that, like Brown versus Board of Education. Bell's got a paper on that. They talk about this stuff, and they talk about, I can understand their frustration because it took too long to get the civil rights. But they're trying to look at this in a very specific way, and, what they prescribe is just wrong, in my opinion. It's just the wrong way to go about it. They bring up some interesting problems, and then they just, they try to execute it very, very poorly. And so, like I said, that was 1970. And then in 1989, you had the first annual workshop on critical race theory. So sometime in the late 80s, you had the term critical race theory come up. And, there were a lot of people in there. There was Kimberly Crenshaw, Peggy McIntosh, Patricia Hill Collins, Richard Delgado, Stefan Chuck. So basically, this workshop, the way I would compare it, there's a lot of people who make comparisons to this stuff being religion. John McWhorter says straight out, it is a religion. It is not religious and religion-like. It is purely a religion. Think about this workshop as the Council in Nicaea for Christianity. So how they laid out the basic tenets of Christianity, the what books are we going to get into the Bible? Should they use the Old Testament or not? Like, this was what that workshop was basically hammering out the details. So that was in 1989. And then by the late 90s, you had a thing come out called critical white studies. And so, again, it was critical race theorists, but they were looking at it through the lens of whiteness, and they were specifically focusing on whiteness. So, Robin DiAngelo's white fragility would fall under there. But then also Robin DiAngelo, she looked at it and she called it, critical social justice. She was like doing an all-encompassing thing. So you can use critical social justice for the gender theory, the queer theory, critical race theory, fatness studies, disability studies, like all these kind of things that come in that use this critical lens. But whether or not this is critical race theory is kind of like immaterial. If you want to think about this, think back to intelligent design and the debate over that and the fight on that. Intelligent design was, something Douglas Murray had referred to as Jesus smuggling. He didn't refer to intelligent design as Jesus smuggling, but he used that term, and that's it's a very good way to describe it. It was smuggling in Christian creationism into the curriculum. It wasn't, and by that I don't mean it was teaching Christianity as a subject, talking about what it is and, where it comes from, and like actually talking about it, but it was using Christianity in the curriculum, and it was forming the curriculum, and it was, they didn't use God, they used a designer when they were talking about God basically designing, making an intelligent design to humanity and all life on the planet. So you can think of this stuff, this curriculum is to CRT what intelligent design was to Christianity. Now, intelligent design was, I think, better couched because Christians have a lot more experience in apologetics than, critical race theorists do, because critical race theory hasn't been around as long. But, I'll give you a few examples, or I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. So this is from Loudoun County in Virginia, and this is from Eric Williams, the superintendent. While LCPS has not adopted CRT, some of the principles related to race as a social construct and the sharing of stories of racism, racialized oppression, etc. that we are encouraging through the action plan to combat systemic racism in some of our professional learning modules and our use of instructional resources on the social justice standards do align with the ideology of CRT. So when I say think of it like intelligent design, that's what I mean. It is smuggling in CRT into the curriculum, and it's not teaching about it or what it is. It's actually basing the curriculum on that foundation, just like intelligent design was basing the foundation of what it was teaching on Christian creationism. So think about it that way. Now, again, this is not the conversation you should be having. This is the conversation you should be having about is what's in the curriculum and what's going on. Your first problem in the U.S., in Canada, it's not as bad, but it's harder to find numbers here, and I think some of our numbers are fudged. But in the U.S., you have 22% of kids graduating high school who can do math at grade level. You have 35% of kids graduating who can read and write at grade level. So that is your problem. That's what needs to be fixed. So go in with examples of stuff in the curriculum. Go in with, specifics of what's being taught and why, ask why that stuff's being taught. And most of this stuff goes against, the U.S. Civil Rights Act. It goes against Title VII. So I'll give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. So this is from a book being used in parts of Pennsylvania, and it's also being used in some districts in Evansville, Illinois, and it could be other places, but I know those two places for sure. The book's called Not My Idea, and it says whiteness is a bad idea, always was. And then it's got a contract binding you to whiteness, and look at what it says, and it costs you your soul. And you're, like I said, this is for kindergarten kids. They should not be getting kids to focus on their race like this. If you're going to a meeting, bring up stuff like this. Or here's from Nevada, this was Gabrielle Clark. She's actually got a lawsuit. They had her son label his identity, like his gender identities, racial identities, religious identities, I also believe his sexual orientation. And it was, he had to do this publicly, or making him do it. And when he didn't want to do it, they failed him in the class. Another thing you should bring up is about examples of where this is tried before and failed horrifically. Two that stand out are Dalton School and the Fieldstone Academy in New York City. But both of these places have put in similar tactics. Basically, at the Fieldstone Academy, kids from grade 3 to grade 8, 45 minutes a week, were separated by race. They call them racial affinity groups. Letters had gone home to the parents asking them which race the kids belong to. This is for mixed, to help out with mixed race kids. And then, like I said, for 45 minutes a week, they would split the kids up by race. They would tell the white kids that you are oppressors, you've been oppressing people, white people have been oppressing, you're responsible for all the ills in the world, basically, and telling everything bad thing that white people did. And for all the other kids, so the brown and black, the Latino, the South Asian, the East Asian, black kids, whatever, they told them how they had been oppressed and they were always going to be oppressed and white people were oppressing them. And then they told them about all the great things their races did. Now that, within a couple of months, the kids were turning into ethno nationalists. The white kids were spouting off KKK like rhetoric. The other race kids were becoming very, very, like I said, ethno nationalists. They were putting too much pride on their race. They would go on the internet looking up for, what's great about being white, what's great about being black or Latino, and just basically focusing on their racial identity. And those schools have had issue after issue since then. This was in 2015, so you can bring stuff like that up. And I'll give you one other example of what I'm talking about. This is from the East Side Community School in New York City. It's the 8 white identities, and they want you to be a white abolitionist, basically someone who tears down whiteness and all the structures of whiteness. And it could be on one side it's white supremacist, on the other side it's white abolitionist, and the white abolitionist is green, and that's what they want. I said, bring in this stuff, complain about this stuff, ask them how this is going to help kids learn how to read, ask them how focusing on race is going to help kids figure out math. Ask them very specific, pointed questions. Don't get into the debate about whether or not this is CRT. That's what they want you to focus on. The people who are trying to push this through want you to focus on whether or not it's CRT, because then you're not focused on what's actually getting pushed through. Focus on what's getting pushed through and focus on what you want to get fixed. Don't bother with the rest of it. I'll put some links to some stuff below. If you want to really dig into the stuff, you have to do a lot of reading. If you want to get a rough idea, if you want to actually get a pretty good idea, but it doesn't go into, it goes into like the history and all of the stuff, but you won't have to end up reading a ton of books. Get Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. If you want some good resources, check out Parents Defending Education, Fair, No Left Turn Education, and Counterweight. If you want to get into some of the terms, what they mean, check out New Discourses. Also put a link to John McWhorter's Substack, and it's free to subscribe. You can check out, he's serialized his new book upcoming, which is discussing on how this form of anti-racism, like the CRT stuff, is a religion. And like I said, don't focus on whether or not this is CRT. Don't focus on whether or not this is neo-Marxism or any of that stuff. Just speak specifically about the curriculum. Speak specifically about what they're teaching, and speak specifically about the problems. And don't worry about anything else.